Moving on, our next session, which is the Keynote Address and Delivering Comfort in a Sustainable Way Through Design. I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Simon Griffiths, Executive Principal, Aedas. Let's put our hands together. Mr. Griffiths strongly believes in providing creative solutions that have environmental, cultural, social understanding of the communities that they're designed for. We welcome you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. So the topic we've been selected today is on delivering comfort. Thank you. Delivering comfort in a sustainable way through design. Now, I think the challenge as an architect is trying to understand what comfort actually is. It's a perceived value. What's comfortable for me may be not comfortable for someone else. So I think the first area that we look at is the definition. And as you can clearly see, providing comfort is to provide ease, free of constraint, contributing to a pleasant lifestyle. So as architects and master planners, that's something that is paramount to what we actually do. We have to understand the end user's requirements, how to provide comfort, and then through that we can provide good design. A good example, which provides more comfort? The old leather-worn sofa or a modern Italian masterpiece? Both of them are sustainable, both of them are natural materials, but they provide very different comforts or values for different people. Likewise, we talk about sustainable design. It's not something new. Sustainable design has been going on for many centuries. Some of the best sustainable design is actually some of the traditional villages. The materials, the design, bringing communities together, safety, security. We had all that. Are we moving away from that to create something different, or do we need to look back and understand how to provide that comfort and sustainability, but in a modern way? So to try and look at that, it's a very large topic, and I've tried to break it down into 3 different sectors. The first one is very much on the macro scale, city, urban master planning, designing of cities, and how to improve people's lifestyles. The second part then focuses on more of the buildings and the architecture and how do we actually model or value comfort. And then the last part is some simple things that we can actually do to existing buildings to actually make them more sustainable or more comfortable. So starting with the city planning. I think this is very relevant because India has some major plans to develop 100 smart cities over the next 5 years. I think trying to understand what the core city is first and what are the strengths and weaknesses of a city planning will actually then lead us to basically a sustainable design, one that works for the next 100 to 200 years and encourages people to grow and expand. This diagram here suggests how cities traditionally grew. They started as a central hub and typically radiated out as the population grew. People moved outwards to the outer regions. Little villages then started to connect to each other. These villages, through transport links, road networks, trade, would start to grow and develop through. Good examples of this sort of urban sprawl would be the capital cities here in India. But the problem is that these hubs, these centres of these cities, the centre of the villages where communities, transport and everything was brought together, starts to fragment. As the cities expand, new areas, new growth areas start to develop. These cities expand outwards. It puts a strain on infrastructure. It puts a strain on education. People start having to commute 2 hours to get to work. Is that really providing a comfortable lifestyle? So I think without control or without understanding what cities are, how do people actually function in cities, you start to get this sprawl across where it's an equal division of buildings, infrastructure, schools spread across the board, but there's always going to be gaps and holes that need filling, and it's timing. To develop a city fully functional is going to take hundreds of years. Good examples of master planning and growth is within Delhi itself or some of the outer regions within Gurgaon and Noida. These have followed traditional master planning, where from a central hub, they've grown outwards. There is a careful master plan with plots and developments where you have a park area, you have a commercial area, you have a residential area. But it's not necessarily how cities work. You know, parks, education, residential should all be mixed together as a single entity. So, as I mentioned, we can start to add layers onto cities, whether they're existing or new. We can start to introduce the BRT, we can improve the metro connection. But all of these still have distances between them. They have connectivity, they have costs associated with that expansion. So maybe the right way of city planning is not to expand forever outwards, but to possibly relook at the city itself and try to consolidate more closely. And it's something that Aedas is seeing within Asia, very much so. And it's a word that we're starting to propose as densification. Rather than expanding outwards, densify existing cities or new cities. Sorry. You know, good examples of traditional infrastructure is where you have an established city and then the metro system comes in, it's either elevated or it causes disruption because you're digging up to put underground. But it's adding on to that infrastructure and supporting, but not necessarily fully integrated into a city. So I think a lot of the cities that we see today have this plan where there are hubs and different areas, but there's no real logic or substance that brings it all together. And I think this slide is very appropriate, that as you can see, we have 1 or 2 kilometers between metro stations. The urban spread is equal among all of them, but it puts a constraint. You know, commuting time, people going to school, it's not an easy or good lifestyle. An alternative may be to start trying to reuse some of the existing land, to densify the land and to bring mixed use. So you can integrate transport, education, public parks, residential, all together in a single development, and it basically has all the end users' needs in one location rather than them traveling to different locations. So maybe the focus, rather than traditional master planning, is to look at these clusters of high densified space, look at developing the transport-orientated hubs, looking at the mixed-use developments, maybe looking at some of the policies whereby mixed-use developments become more of the norm rather than dedicated plots of land. And I think that will encourage the growth and people, it'll have all the amenities close to hand. So it seems to be a good way of working where we have very high population, a lot of networks need to be connected. We're seeing these trends in Hong Kong, Singapore, even in China now, where they have vast amounts of land, and previously they spread out, they have a lot of empty cities. They're starting to go back into the main cities and densify them, creating these urban hubs. Same with the green parks. The traditional idea was that a green park is always separate. It's something you go to. Maybe it can be integrated within the building. People, go to work every day. At lunchtimes, you can go and use the park space because it's within that development. So the concept of densification is trying to bring a lot of these buildings and components together, stacking them through clever design. So you get permeability, you get porosity. Ground level, you can have open plains, natural light coming through, but you can create different layers of facilities and program. Connecting buildings together at high level. This is something that has happened a lot within Asia, but it starts to allow people to flow at the second or third level of cities rather than at ground level, so you can actually create more safety and separate. Green in the buildings. This is not just something to add on as a sustainable item. It's something that people as users want to achieve. They want to be able to go out and sit for lunch in a green park or covered and sheltered. So that's the trend that we're starting to see more and more in some of the major cities throughout Asia and even London, for example. And just to give you some examples of how that can actually be integrated, We were one of the pioneers in Hong Kong of developing this elevated walkway connection. Previously, Hong Kong was a series of individual office towers and buildings and retail, connected at street level with the trams and cars. We actually worked with the government to develop a network of bridges and links, which now have evolved to public plazas, to public gardens, all at second or third level up, but it basically separates people, it creates additional commercial levels, and is something that has been very, very successful. Singapore's had a very strong master plan vision over the last 50 years. But even there, they're realizing that the land is limited. So we're starting to work again with the Singapore government to look at how to use the underground spaces, not just the metro, but retail. Some of the functions that people use that don't necessarily need daylight, etc. So we're starting to create these layers of cities vertically rather than horizontally. So I think starting to look at mixed-use developments and dissolving buildings, bringing buildings together, connecting buildings together in the existing fabric is something that we would like to sort of see as a trend that starts to develop in some of the smart cities that are being proposed. Bringing all the different sectors and components together so that they all work together and it creates a synergy rather than separate entities where you have to travel quite large distances between them. Another example that is currently under construction in Hong Kong. The brief was to design a high-speed rail terminus station in Hong Kong. But we took the concept and we've basically integrated a public park. So there's a full community plaza and park using the top of the building. We also have all of the residential and commercial offices on top of the development. So it becomes a transit hub, full mixed use, 3 uses in one plot. But we're still achieving daylight, open spaces, open views. Another project recently completed in Singapore. The challenge here was there was an existing metro station below ground. We had retail components, they wanted a public plaza component, and a convention centre, public galleries, libraries. So what we've done is we've integrated all of those on 4 different levels with a 5,000-seat auditorium, an open retail area surrounding a naturally ventilated plaza. We've designed the building to encourage the flow of air underneath the building, so it's all naturally ventilated, even in the Singapore climate and humidity, which is similar to here. And then all that connects through directly and easily to the metro system below. And again, even in China, where they have vast land banks, we are creating these mixed-use developments around transport hubs, whether it's metro, bus terminus, taxi, residential, commercial, office space, so that you create this vibrant community. Weekends, you don't have a CBD that shuts and goes quiet because no one's there. You have this work-life balance, and you encourage that. And again, we're starting to try and bring those ideas even into India. This is a project we're working on in Mumbai, where we're integrating with a bus terminus and a station, creating a public plaza realm with the retail and with office and residential, all focused around this central plaza, so that the ideas that we're taking from these other regions can be integrated here. The next part is the architecture. So, as I mentioned, comfort and sustainability, comfort is a perceived value. It's sometimes hard to measure or understand. So architects and engineers have created a lot of tools to try and verify design, verify figures and how we achieve good design. So a lot of the analysis that we do, and this is done on every project, looking at the solar studies, looking at the wind movements around buildings, looking at the orientation even of the building. And some good examples, this is a project, it's social housing in Singapore, low budget, but we've tried to break the industry norm of traditional concrete buildings. We've integrated the green parks within these clusters, And we've even started to look at the wind analysis to make sure that you don't get these swirling eddy currents within the plazas, that it's a comfortable environment all year round. And even taking that through to the technology used. We've pioneered a lot of the precasting systems, looking at the acoustics, sustainability factor of installing these precast units into the social housing project. Other tools that we have in our power is solar studies. This is a project here in Delhi that we are looking at a tall tower, but unfortunately most of the views are east, south and west facing, which from a solar point of view is the worst, but we want to create that transparency. So we're looking at clever ways with the client on how to create intelligent facades. How do you create a very transparent open view at night, but then by day you can actually cool the building down or reduce the amount of sun and solar gain. And again, these tools are not only just to verify design works, you can actually use them to enhance and integrate into the design. This is a project in Hong Kong, a very small slither of a site for a hotel, right in the heart of Hong Kong, and as you know, it's a very dense, built-up environment. So what we actually did is we modelled the sun path, but using the existing buildings around our site, and what that did is it started to map on our tower where the exposed sun would be hitting. So you can see here, this is the radiation on the glass, and that has allowed us to then pinpoint exactly where we need to treat the glass, and it starts to integrate an interesting facade. So you can see we've added the louvers and screens only specifically where that's needed, and it starts to create a dynamic and interesting facade design. Another project that we've done, again, using intelligent facade systems. This is in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi. The brief from the client was very much that he didn't want the traditional highly mirrored reflective glass. He wanted more transparent glass, but being in the desert, that's always a challenge, especially for an office building. So we've pioneered a system that responds to the sun. As the sun actually moves around the building, small simple photodiodes on each of these petals open and closes the petal, so it becomes an adaptive responsive building. We tested all of the petals in extreme environments with the sand and grit and maintenance, and it's all now installed and working. And then finally, when we talk about sustainability, we talk about technology, I think there are a lot of things that we can actually do very simply. Those can enhance a building at the end, but getting the planning right, getting the connectivity, getting people's comfort right has to be paramount. And I think some of the simple things that we can do to enhance that comfort in design is just on simple levels. Looking at integrating more landscape, but using landscape. This is a project where we've introduced a 1.5 kilometre cycle track through, connecting different phases, connecting different parts of the system, where we can integrate that through the project. Another example is a project where residential is all about children, safety, play-in, etc. So having children go downstairs and play where cars are parking, for me, is not, as a family person, is not a safe environment. Here, what we've tried to do is consolidate the parking into a small podium. We've put the clubhouse and everything on top, and we've connected that clubhouse with bridges at second floor level, so children and families can come down safely and play safely across the bridges, and there's no or limited interaction with cars. So just simple things like that, understanding families, who's going to be using the building, and you can start to design around that. Integrating landscape into the design. A lot of the policies here in India talk about RG, but that RG is typically something that has to be given. It's not fully integrated into the project. It sometimes doesn't necessarily enhance the project. So maybe by creating these multiple layers that we can use, you can integrate nature and the building more successfully. And finally, simple things like security. Understanding that your family can come home safe in the evening. So just good lighting, clean environments, car parks typically have been an afterthought. They're dark, they're sometimes damp. Just put in, good lighting in, maybe some CCTV. That can enhance and allow a sustainable design to continue for another 50 years. Ultimately, it's about the end user and how they feel comfortable. So I think to wrap up all of that, there is a lot of discussion going on, and I think it has to be done hand in hand. We have to understand who ultimately we're designing a building for. I think the government and the private developers and the people investing into these developments can actually look and talk and see how best to integrate master plans, development, possibly look at existing legislation and see whether we can create these connections at high level, make better use of the public parks and integrate them more successfully. And I think through that we can then continue to develop sustainable and comfortable design. So thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for sharing with us how responsible design can truly make comfort and sustainable living. But to thank you, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Deepak Lamba, and may I also request the presence of Mr. Unikrishnan from Saint-Gobain. Let's put our hands together as the gentlemen step on stage. Presenting the certificate. And a memento along with the Saint-Gobain book, The History of the Future. May I request all of you to join us for a group picture? Sir, may I request you to join us for a group picture, please? We'd like to capture the moment.